Okay, I want to call to order the policy committee meeting for the Belton School Board of Trustees. Today is February the 1st, 2021. Present with myself, as far as school board members, Chris Floor, Ms. Janet Lee. So there is not a quorum present. Connie, you put us up for public comments?
Yes, sir.
All right. I guess we'll move on to item 3 of the agenda, CW local naming of facilities, first meeting.
We'll invite Mike to come on up. As you know, Mike's been working on this, and again, we as a policy committee have been diving into this to put together a process that we feel good about moving forward for the future, not only renaming facilities, but naming new facilities. And so Mike's been working on some iterations of this and getting feedback from a few of you as well, so here we go.
Thank you for bringing forward. We look forward to this next step in reworking our CW local, and we hope to come out of tonight's committee meeting with the first draft or the first reading, where we can move forward with the second reading at the February 15th board meeting. As Matt said, this is we have been seeking feedback on this. We first came to the policy committee in October and then again in December with a couple of rounds of feedback and drafts. We brought this, the draft that came out of the December facilities or policy committee meeting to the January facilities committee meeting and solicited feedback from them as well. Based on those 3 rounds of feedback, we have been in consultation with our TASB rep, policy rep, who really made no recommendations for substantive change, but did kind of consolidate some of the language. And then we did run it through our counsel, Holly Wardell, last week and get her suggestions as well. Just kind of a brief summary of where the direction that the discussions have gone since our first step of the process back in October is we did establish a little more of a definite criteria, and I'm certain that's something that we'll probably want to discuss a little more tonight. Some of the feedback that came from our December meeting was making certain that it was crystal clear on how to make a nomination, and then once that nomination was made, what the options were for the board facility committee to work moving forward once the nomination was made. One of the things that I heard loud and clear in the prior feedback was how would we address a nomination if the board facilities committee, in working with the superintendent, chose to decline to move that nomination forward. So we wanted to make sure that was addressed in any type of final draft or final version. After talking it through and looking at some other districts again, and talking it over with our TASB rep, we did feel it was important to go ahead and include the ability to include financial donation as part of the criteria. That obviously would never be a prerequisite, and it's only one stipulation in that clause 3C under criteria. But if the district chose to go that route and the board chose to approve that as an action item at some point, we felt it would be important to have that in the policy as an option. And then the main feedback that we received from the board facilities committee was that they felt strongly that the final approval for mascots and school colors should rest with the board, and they were pretty convincing in their arguments with that.
I noticed that changing.
So we are.
And I can tell you the superintendent felt okay about that.
We would hope in a perfect world that would be the superintendent and his or her team could assemble the proper stakeholders to be involved in that process, and would be able to come forward to the board with some strong recommendations that the board could use to make that final decision. But we did that. The arguments are strong, and as they articulated, that would be a possibility to maybe even protect the superintendent and protect his administration. So we felt okay with that, but we do want to make sure to discuss that with you guys tonight as well.
I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about me.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. I feel the love. It's here's my comment on it. Is that, again, board lives in the policy realm, and so on some of these things, it is entirely your choice on that stuff. Ultimately, our mascots and colors, the biggest decision that needs to be weighed in by the board, I would say no. But I do know that based on our history and growing into a second high school in this district, it is one of high community interest. And so I am entirely good leaving it would, be a board decision, for the foreseeable future for now, and we'll go from there. I wanna do what's right by our community, and I think that's probably the right choice by our community in my book.
Or we could just let Facebook decide.
Oh, we could. We really could.
So Emmanuel and I talked earlier today about, some of the language of the document. And, I do want to go through that with y'all now, just some of the suggestions that we talked about. None of it was the change of the intent of the policy. But there was some, just some of the language in the document that I would like to go through that I think we will to make a recommendation on them. First is on page 1, there is a typo that where it says permanent in the first line, so we'll make sure that either is hyphenated or the permanent comes back to the top is one word. Under definitions, number 5, where it says any other building or adjacent land area that is the property of the district or the board, as Manuel and I discussed that, probably and the board would be adequate to drop that off. If it's property of the district, then obviously the board would be associated with that. Moving on to page 2 of the document, under nominations, at the conclusion of paragraph 1, where it says supplemental materials such as news clippings, letters of recommendation, and other printed resources may be submitted along with the nomination, we're gonna say to the office of the superintendent. And then where it says nominations shall be submitted using the district's facility name nomination form to the office of the superintendent. So we'll make sure it's clear that not only with the instructions in that document, but in policy that where that will be submitted. And I think that clarifies nominations go straight to another source, so they're gonna go to the superintendent's office first. We did exclude a little bit of the language under paragraph 3 under nominations. So we moving forward, we'll come forward where it says the board facilities committee in consultation with the superintendent shall review all nominations. And then we're gonna delete the rest of that paragraph and just say decide whether to semicolon and then have the three options there. There was a little bit of redundancy in that. We're gonna simplify that language. Basically, they're gonna review the nominations and they're gonna make one of 3 recommendations. And so that will be to move the nomination forward, to be considered by the full board, to establish a school name selection committee. And we're just gonna say to consider the nomination. And then third would be take no action. And this is something we had planned to do, and Manuel and I talked about, go ahead and put it in policy. Take no action and notify the person making the nomination of such action. So if we do choose to take no action, we will have a notification that goes back and says, thank you for your nomination. At this time, we've chosen not to act on the nominations. Throughout this, we will go back and where it says school name selection committee, we're gonna make that formal. We're gonna make that more formal and capitalize that in all references. So it's in the final reading, there will be the school, anywhere where it mentions school name selection committee, that'll be capitalized. And we had a couple of points of discussion, but as far as edits, Manuel, I believe those are our edits.
I think that's it. Okay.
And so I would say at this point, we would like to potentially take us through a couple of situations and kind of put it in real terms. If a nomination came in, kind of how we envision the process would work. But before, I think that's kind of the final step. Before we do that, I would entertain any other questions or discussions about any part of the policy before we move forward into that.
And just for the record, that's what Mike's talking about is what we discussed today by phone.
No, makes sense.
Totally makes sense.
Good. The argument there. I think it looks good.
We also talked about some scenarios. If a member of the community says they want to nominate, I want this nomination to go through, fills out the form, sends it to the office of superintendent, take it from there, Mike.
Okay, so so we would have a nomination form that would be available to any member of the public. And if they make that nomination and they submit that nomination to the superintendent. So we believe the framework of this policy would allow the superintendent through agenda development with the facility committee to determine whether or not to take any of those actions named. So, the facility committee can bring that nomination forward, and that nomination can then be discussed and put on as an agenda item where the full board can take action, to approve or not that recommendation of renaming a facility. The facility committee at that point could determine this is something we would like more consideration on, but we would like to get a wider array of perspectives, so they could name a school name selection committee that could move forward with that nomination, or the facility committee in consultation with the superintendent could decide to take no action on that nomination at that time. And the way we kind of envision that working, because obviously when you have open nominations, you're gonna have some very serious and legitimate nominations. You also could have some nominations made that aren't as serious or aren't probably would not have the support. And so we would want to give the superintendent and the facilities committee the discretion to not move on those and not have to bring those forward in an open session of the committee. So I would envision, and Matt could probably see my envision of this would be that as we plan agendas and we know we've got a nomination there, if we chose not to, then in the committee meeting, you just say we did have a nomination to rename the library at Belton High School. At this time, we choose not to act and move that nomination forward without getting into the specifics of who made the nomination or what the nomination was to protect. So does everyone, I mean, that's kind of how I envision that process might work.
Here's the example that Mike used in the facilities committee meeting. Just say that wanted to rename a stadium after Mike Morgan.
Right.
And there was a petition that went forward that said, we want to name Wilson Kersey Morgan Field or whatever it might be. It might be a nice honor for Mike. Mike's a great employee of Belton ISD, but it might not be appropriate to move forward at this time. We could have 1,000 people that Mike used to coach that said, I think that's a great idea, but it might not be the right time to move that nomination forward. On the flip side, you might have things that are just kind of absurd, like we want to name this Chick-fil-A High School. And kids might think that was great, and we might get petitioned by a lot of people to do something like that, but there's probably a whole host of issues involved in that. So there are a couple different sides of that. One could be a real legitimate one that the timing might just not be right, and another might just be, hey, this is kind of absurd. So
We do want to stipulate anytime that we're either naming a campus, that we do go to a selection committee for that. That's a big item, and we even in policy it says we want to make sure we have stakeholders from the stakeholders from that area. So if it's a elementary school, even if attendance boundaries haven't been drawn, you have a general idea of who that area is going to serve. If it is something like a renaming of a stadium or a district stadium or some type of district facility, then you could create, or you can bring in stakeholders from the entire district to take part in that discussion and come forward with recommendations. So if it is the facility committee would always have the ability to convene a selection committee, but for a new campus or renaming of a campus, they would always go to a selection committee for that. And then there's one thing that's been in here since the start, but I think it's probably the most important part, is the board shall have final approval of the naming and renaming of all district-owned facilities or portions of facilities. So there is no scenario of where if we're going to rename a BISD facility that the board wouldn't have final approval on that action.
You said something that kind of tickled a memory from last time we were talking about this. I think when we were talking about new campuses, we had also thrown around a time period around that. Did we throw that out?
TASB recommended that we keep those timeframes in mind, but that it typically that leave that up to the board or to the facilities committee to kind of dictate their own timeline. Don't marry yourself to a timeline.
Yeah, okay,
So
all right, that makes sense.
they said that we're still thinking about 12 months for a high school is pretty timely to give you time to do a lot of the branding and things. But TASB suggested we delete that because of and give the board the authority to go ahead and establish, or the facilities committee the authority to establish that timeline.
kind of internally though, as an administration, we would want to make sure that we're putting that forward at the right time for y'all.
Yeah.
So that's great.
I think the other thing we discussed was we wanted to make sure that we addressed the ability of the district to address the floodgates, okay? If we have a slew of nominations coming in, so we can address those in a timely fashion, but also those nominations that are, quite sincere and that have a lot of public support, that due considerations given to that nomination by the way that we have the procedures in place. So I think this does that.
That's what we were hoping for. I mean, it may not answer every scenario perfectly, but it gives a framework where superintendent, facilities committee, and full board can kind of work through this process.
Matt, you okay with this?
I'm excited about it. I think that this is one of those policies that if we can get in place now, I think helps us for the future to avoid putting you all as a board in some really tough situations. Because as we continue to grow, more and more of these types of conversations are gonna keep coming up. So,
Because essentially it was, this policy, it was non-existent.
Right.
We didn't have anything in place.
in what that always makes me worry about is the emotion attached to something. And so if you have the death of a staff member, the death of a student, or a longtime person leaving, if you don't have a good policy in place to just funnel the right things through, then it can really put you all as a board in a tough spot. And so my hope is that this policy gives the board the right information and gives the community the right process.
And so I guess what I would ask tonight is considering the changes that we discussed, primarily on page 2 on page 1, and 3 or 4 on page 2, other than just capitalizing school name selection committee, that we would be able to go ahead and consider this our first reading, and with those edits, we can take the second reading to the board on February 15th.
And I think, just for the record, by policy, we have the ability to make this our first reading, so we're okay there. So I don't think we have any issue that, on that regard, do we, Chris? Janet, you have any issue with that?
Not at all.
Okay.
Well, thank y'all very much for your input. This has been a fun process to work through, and I think we've all given it diligence, and I think we've ended up with a product that's going to benefit the district.
Mike, you're doing a great job with this. Yeah, it's something brand new. We haven't tackled it. It's a sensitive topic, so great job with that.
And we hope, I know that we have some great community people in Belton ISD that this might really help us acknowledge those people and what they've given in their service to the district or their service to the community. And I feel like your policy can really help it keep Belton really special. So I'm excited about this one. Good job, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. I bet I know who's next.
So, she sat back down, she might not want to come. So, EIC local and academic achievement and class ranking, that's another pretty neat policy, and with a lot of implications on our kids and on our classrooms and on our teachers. So come on up, Ian. So Deanna's coming forward to talk to us a little bit more about this. This is not at a first reading stage. This is it, and I think it says next to it, learning/study. This is where we as a policy committee are learning together, talking some things out, and talking about the direction we may want a policy to go. But we aren't expecting you to say, yes, this is a first reading, go forward today, or we're not at the wordsmithing stage. I wanted to point that out because I think that'll help Deanna a little bit, because as we talk about this is one of those loaded policies right here that
And I would add to that, we're not even at the predetermining where we should go with it stage. It's truly a conversation that we have together around what this policy does, and then some work we as administration can do, and I could lead moving forward. So with that, let's just start with the next slide. So where are we at in discussing this? Like Matt said, it's a learning study discussion tonight. And so we've established these journey of graduate competencies. We just got those approved. Next slide. And now I think our challenge is to really unpack, if we believe as a system that students should have a learning experience that allows them to pursue their hopes and dreams, that's what we core believe, and we want them to have these competencies of perseverance, adaptability, collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and empathy, then we've got to start to examine our policies. and to really decide where we believe in that and what the, kind of where our spectrum is on establishing that beliefs in our system. And so EIC rises as to a piece of that conversation. So before I talk to you kind of about some things with EIC, I really wanted to just start with the actual policy, and then we can kind of have a conversation around that. So if you don't mind, Connie, if you'll go to the EIC policy, just kind of, this is a quick brief. I know we've talked about this policy many times. I think in the past when we've talked about it, we've really been on a lens of the calculation of it, and this is really through a lens of hopes and dreams for kids and what it does for our students. And so just some things to really point out in that very first paragraph of this policy, it states that we will calculate class rank for all students in our system. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but our policy says all students. We've looked at different policies in the past. That is not something that has to be in place. That's a choice that we've made. Next, in the calculation paragraph, we specifically state that we will calculate our English language arts, our math beyond algebra, although Algebra 1 is a high school course, science, social studies, and we specifically name those, and then foreign languages, again, beyond level 1. That was in place, and a positive in that is our middle school students take Algebra 1 and Spanish 1. Those are courses that are offered at the middle school level. So when we talk about students fulfilling their hopes and dreams and taking courses, because we do not calculate Algebra 1 and Spanish 1 in this policy, we give students the opportunity to pursue those classes at a middle school level pretty risk-free. It won't impact them when they get to high school for their final GPA.
Deanna, what about kids who take geometry
Um,
at the middle school level?
We do not have geometry in place at the middle school level in the policy to hold them harmless. So geometry would count,
Even if they take it through.
even if they take middle school, because we don't state in our policy, no high school courses taken at the middle school level. So we specify Algebra 1. We have very few students in geometry, but that's a great question.
Hold on.
I love it.
Okay.
Go for it.
If they take Algebra 1 in middle school,
Uh-huh.
you're saying that there's a circumstance that actually could be used in our high school GPA calculation?
We do not.
Right, we don't, the way it's written.
But if we did not have it written that way and we
Yeah.
just calculated high school math courses, then yes, an Algebra 1 course would be calculated.
Wow. I would
And-
never,
So some districts do that, some districts do not. Some districts state all middle school courses taken would not calculate it. So we choose to treat a course as a course, not when you take it. So we don't count Algebra 1 for anyone. So if you take Algebra 1, when you take it at the high school level, it also is not calculated in your GPA.
But if you take geometry
It is.
in the 8th grade and you bomb, then it could cause some issues for you in high school,
It
your
would,
GPA.
for your GPA, for GPA
Which is why
purposes.
very few do it.
Correct.
Because they have to have tested to be able to do that. They have to have passed a test to be able to do
Right, and those are some, if you're taking geometry at middle school, you're in it, that's 2 years advanced.
And just
But yes, it would count.
concurring with Deanna, though, other districts approach that differently.
Oh, for
And so
sure.
if you have a course that is offered at a high school for a credit and you take that as a middle schooler, they have a process where you sign off on that and say, I understand that taking this course is going to be reflected on my high school transcript outlining these. So you'd be able to see as an 8th grade student, Chris Floor took Algebra 1 and got an A, Matt Smith took it and got a D and still gonna calculate. So and it depends on the district on how they do this.
okay, so let's just play this forward, right? So, okay, they take it in middle school for credit, that's less credits they need, they can graduate early?
Correct.
Correct.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around, should we be, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I got you, I'm with you.
Yeah, we do not calculate, and that's what we include, so we don't include fine arts courses in a weighted GPA. We don't, and I've talked to other districts that do, And they don't weight the fine arts course, they just include the course in the GPA. Well, that presents some challenges down the road when you have kids vying, in a class, they rank, and so an on-level course impacts a kid.
But how do you guys feel about that?
Well, I can tell you that the district I was speaking with, they were wanting to remove it because they have kids that choose to not take the 4th year course. Because if my GPA and I'll share some GPA information in a minute with our classes, but if my GPA is 105 and I'm gonna take an on-level band and it's going to count in my GPA, the highest it can count is 100, no matter what, if I get 100, it would lower my GPA, I won't take it. And so when we think about kids pursuing their hopes and their dreams and taking the things that they want to do, this top policy comes into play daily with what kids will choose.
It did with mine, very much so.
Mhm.
But I will also say, this was part of the other conversation I had with my husband, is because he went to a district long ago that had no weighting in grades. And the same thing would then apply. They would still do the same thing. If they knew that they were going to a very competitive college, they would take classes that were only AP, make sure that they
Right.
scored the highest in the highest, most challenging classes, and they would drop all of that stuff the same way they would even if it was weighted.
Right, so what we won't lose in this is that you're absolutely right. Kids are still going to choose their courses and families based on what they believe. We just want to look within our system, do we artificially put up barriers that force choices where kids don't have the opportunity to choose? And that's what we gotta wrestle with. So the next thing I wanna point out in this policy, if you'll go down to weighted, we do weight courses. We've talked about that before. We have right now 4 leveled weightings. AP is our highest level. Dual credit on-ramps pre-AP is our level 3. And on-level courses are at 2, and then skills-based courses are at 1. So when you think again about students pursuing their hopes and dreams, this piece right here immediately comes into impact. And I can pursue a associate's degree through the Bioscience Institute. I'll walk out with an associate's degree and meet my high school credits, but I will have a lower potential for maximum GPA than if I did not pursue that and I took all AP courses. And that's just one example. But it's a real example where our kids are going to choose based on our rank, because again, we rank. And then the other thing I would point out is actually an exhibit H, if you don't mind to just open that one up. And there's a lot more in the NIC, we can certainly go through any questions you have, but for this conversation, just to point out again, we weight every point. So when we looked at some other policies in other districts, we saw some ranges where they sent a message that a 95 to 100 is gonna be weighted as 7.0. We do not do that in our system. We weight every point. And so it matters if you're competing, a 96 versus a 95 matters in our system. Where in other systems, they choose to do a more open range because what does that difference tell us? So with that, if you'll go back to the outline house, so I felt like just kind of reminding everyone and going through our policy would then open up what we kind of know right now. We know in our, if you will go back to the presentation, I'm sorry. Sorry about apologies. And if you'll go to what we did, one more, thank you. So that's hard to see from, I apologize. What we know that we are required to report the calculation of the top 10% of our students in the state of Texas. We're not actually required to rank per se or tell you what your rank is within the top 10%. According to our policy, we are, because we rank all of our students. That was why I pointed that out. In the state of Texas, there are school districts who will only tell you if you're in the top 10%, but because they're passionate about not ranking, they won't tell you what your actual rank is. We know there is a very slight difference between being in the top 10% and the top 25%. I looked at our class of 2020. This was just one class that I looked at. The top 10% average GPA was 108.0421. The difference between being in the top 10% and not being in the top 10% was 0.021. So 21 thousandths of a decimal kept you out of the top 10%. For the top 25%, our average GPA was 101.889. That's a 7-point difference, but I will tell you that that's where that weighting GPA calculation comes into play, the difference in those weights. And the cut point for being in the top 25% is 0.114, so 114 thousandths.
Deanna, is it safe to say, and I totally could be wrong on this, but when we talk about the top 10% of kids in the school, is it safe to say that many of them are taking all the same courses, the highest level courses to get a GPA that high?
Yes, and they're gonna take, I'd have to really kind of go through what they're taking, but primarily they're going to be taking what counts the most in their weighting, which is an AP.
So many of those students are all AP students,
All
like
AP
they're taking
students,
every AP class that they can.
Right, we're not, right, exactly, every course they can.
And the reason I bring that up is because then when you differentiate to the top 25%, one of the things that might be in play here is that some of those students may have chosen to take another class that wasn't weighted as much.
That's right,
So it's,
absolutely.
That's the group that you're talking about.
That's where the game playing comes in.
That's right.
Which goes right into that next bullet, which is the way courses are weighted impacts how students choose courses. And really impacts what they're going to take versus maybe what they'd like to take, or what they need to take based on what their plans are after high school.
And wouldn't you also say though, Deanna, that this trouble, this sticking point really is in fact on the top 10% of the kids. It doesn't affect the entire grade, it doesn't affect the whole class. It's that top percent that this is a problem for because they can't pursue joy.
That was stated great right there.
Well, which leads to what we don't know, which is the mental impact it's having on our kids, the mental health impact. I think it impacts the top 25%. When you're saying that, not you, but when I'm saying like 21 thousandths of a point separates you from getting to that top 10%, but we're sending a message that we're in class rank and that's essential that you be there. I think that puts a lot of pressure on the student, puts a lot of pressure on every point of every grade they get. I mean, just every little point matters. When we are starting to unpack our journey of a graduate, competencies and adaptability and ability to fail, and I think where are we teaching our top performers that they can fail? And what impact does that have when they go out into work, into a role setting when maybe they haven't truly experienced that that's okay because there's so much pressure within our system. It's a lot to think through. The other pieces that we know are.
One second, I think Chris was gonna.
Oh, I'm so sorry, yeah, sorry.
I mean, adaptability, or perseverance, right, was certainly one of those competencies that came up where I thought it was gonna be really interesting to figure out how does that actually get incorporated into the classroom, right? Because does failure mean a failing grade? Or I don't think it needs to be, it shouldn't actually. If we're trying to teach perseverance, Like, we shouldn't be teaching that through beating them with a stick, you get a failing grade. Like, that should be part of the educational process and part of how you get to whatever the grade is. Yeah, I don't know, that's a whole nother.
That's a whole,
Yeah,
you're right though, and that's a conversation that we're starting to have within our system, even as our grading practices.
yeah.
Which reminds me of an important point with class rank. The playing field's not equal across the district. So we just talked about that. Here's our EIC local policy and what we do with that. But another district that our kids are competing to for acceptance in this top 10% may have a completely different system that values completely different things. And so it's a very uneven playing field to begin with across systems. That we can't fix. Can't change
Nor
that.
can we fix the fact that UT and A&M automatically accept a certain percentage.
They perpetuate this a little bit.
That's right, they
Yeah.
perpetuate this. What we do know though, and I've talked with some other districts and exploring this, is when we have a policy that says we will rank every student, then we are a ranking district. Which means that when our students apply for college applications, they must put that we're a ranking district and here's where they fall. There is an option to not be a ranking system. And then what we know about that is that forces a college to look at students differently than they would if you were a ranking school. So then they take a more holistic approach. What courses did you take? What's your school profile? What was your overall GPA? They look at your college exams. Colleges have these systems in place because they get out-of-state students, and out-of-state, you read the article, there's lots of districts, especially out-of-state, out of Texas, that do not rank, and our kids are in these competitions with them for spots. But Texas has some, those two colleges especially have some systems that
And
involve.
I was talking to my husband about my concern on that was that what if, are they gonna give people who don't rank less preferential treatment? And he said, no, not at all. He said, because even if you come in ranked, they're still gonna look at, individual schools are gonna look at what you did, like within the university, whichever college you're applying to within the university, it still has to look at all of that stuff. They still have to make a decision based on your coursework and all of those things as well. He said it wouldn't matter.
I think there could be a difference for this population outside of the top 10.
Yes.
And that's what we're hearing, top 10 is gonna be, they're gonna know they're in the top 10, they're able to report they're in the top 10. It's that group outside of that group that's in the top 25%. And then the other piece of this is, what is it doing to kids and what they're choosing on a daily basis, or a yearly basis in the courses they wanna pursue. So I gave you that article to read. Thoughts on that? I don't know if that's about you.
Yeah, for a minute I thought I was like, no, this is not the way it's done. But
See,
then,
my reaction was amen.
well, and instantly, my thought, having raised the boys I did, knowing the game that we had to play as a family for them to be able to go to the school that they wanted to go to and the schools that they wanted to go to. My immediate reaction was families in that situation are gonna freak out if you didn't have a class rank. Freak out because they won't understand the paradigm shift. And they wouldn't understand that there is another option for colleges. But that whole idea of it's the college's job to select their students and rank the students, not ours, is a very interesting concept. And I'm still dwelling on it. I still think, I don't personally see value of ranking kids beyond 20%. I don't really see the point at that point, But I'm not quite ready to give up the thought that, I just don't know what that would do to not rank your top 10%.
So I think that's what we've got to wrestle with, and I think that's what, our team has to start to unpack and to study and to, bring in some stakeholders and start to have conversations around. And I put in there, what we don't know is the detailed plan, like, we're not, wouldn't enter into this is what we're going to do. It's not, we're not gonna decide tonight whether we should or shouldn't rank, and then let's create a policy on that. But I do feel like with what we want to accomplish with our students and those competencies that we want them to have, we've got to examine that. And is that the best process for our students? And and if it's not what we do, how do we ensure that there's no harm done either? Like, we want kids to,
Don't wanna do anything that would put them at risk of not
Of
going to
not-
the places
of
that they
not
wanna
getting
go.
That's my biggest
Right,
question out of this whole thing.
and my youngest went to an out-of-state university, so they had to look at him holistically. They had to look at his AP scores and these kinds of things in the classes that would matter to their program.
right,
So we live that too. It can be done, it's just the public acceptance of that.
Yeah.
It's
It is.
difficult.
well, and I think even student acceptance, how do we, what I put in there, as another, what we don't know is the impact of our class ranking on student collaboration and the learning culture. If I know that you are in the top 10% and I am squeaking out at 11%, and there is a 0.021 difference between you and I wonder how authentic we want to collaborate in any class together. Or am I watching your every move and trying to one up you? And what does that do in that culture?
Or sabotage you.
Or sabotage you.
Yes, I hear that, and then the other side of me goes, not everybody gets a trophy, right?
For sure.
So then, that's my other half, because I see it both ways.
It's a lot to think through. How do we go back, I go back to that individual student. How do we just remove those barriers so they'll follow their dreams and pursue the best they can do and compete against themselves?
I mean, I feel like we're boiling the ocean at the moment, or at least trying to. Right? So I gotta bring this back to maybe some more concrete, smaller chunks. Right, so when we look at AP versus dual credit versus on-ramps versus whatever, like, that just doesn't make any sense to me that we treat those differently. Right, now, I don't know how we treat them, right, but the fact that we treat them differently doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Like, we are forcing kids, if you wanna play the game, to take the AP classes when maybe the other ones might be more appropriate. So, and
How about dual credit having 4 points versus?
right, so tier 4 versus tier 3, or, yeah, right. So
Why is dual credit, ranked less than
Rigor.
points wise other than AP?
So, it's a philosophical, belief that it's more rigorous to have an AP course than it would be to have a dual credit course. I can tell you, College Board sets and College Board is a company, by the way. They set the, sequence or the, outline for the courses and the content of courses, and that, if everybody uses their curriculum across the nation, which again, that's optional, then that's standardized, whereas dual credit, college course is not. That's up to the college or the, so it's up to Temple College or UMHB, as to, what is in that course. And on the other hand, is it more rigorous? I think there's some really rigorous college courses, Temple College, UMHB courses. Sometimes those are dependent on the professor. To be totally honest with you, we don't control what's, in a course. But at the end of the day, we've got to decide which do we believe. And I will tell you, a dual credit course is immediately upon completion a college credit. And the courses that we offer are recognized by state universities. So we offer our English 3 course. Every state college in Texas will accept that course. They don't all have to accept APs, they can determine how they wanna accept it, if they, what grade level they wanna, or what grade must be earned on the AP exam for them to accept it. On the flip side, a private university can do what they want, so they don't even have to take our dual credit courses. Out of state, does not have to take a dual credit course that we offer, but a dual credit course upon completion is a college credit.
As I listen to our discussion, I'm in my mind, I'm trying to frame the issues that we're faced with.
Mm-hmm.
And one issue is, do we get rid of the class ranking for the top 10%? Is that an issue that we have? That's one, right?
I think we have to discuss it,
Yeah, we have to
absolutely.
discuss it. Number two, the reason we're having this discussion is because what we've embarked on with the journey of a graduate necessitates this discussion, right?
Mhm.
And thirdly, as Janet said, pursuing
Joy.
joy.
I think that's kind of a big deal, right?
Yeah. Well, it's the pursuit of happiness, right? Hopes and dreams is what you said earlier. So, for me, I wanna see how it really impacts kids. I can see a kid getting in a situation like that, but how big of a problem is it really, as a practical matter? Where kids are, is it like 10 out of the whole class, is it 100? Where they're making these decisions, or, do you see that every day? Where they're struggling with this and say, boy, I sure wish I could take this course, but I can't because I'm trying to get into the University of Texas.
I think that it's not even up for discussion whether or not they wanna take it, because they're programmed that I must take the AP course, cause that's what gets me in the top 10%.
And I have talked to counselors who, like, just hypothetically, who have had the conversation
Right.
and automatically played the game, right? Like, the counselors are leading the students out too.
So we have to, it impacts how we
Yeah.
advise a student. If you tell me you wanna take a course, they're going to tell, and they know you're vying for that top 10%, they're gonna talk you out of a dual credit until you take an AP, or they're not, I don't know, they'll talk you out of it, but they're certainly gonna make sure you're aware the impact it could have on your GPA.
But maybe the kid's hope and dream is to attend the University of Texas or wherever.
Mm-hmm.
So, that would necessitate playing the game, right?
It would, and so do we want to dictate how you play the game? Do we want to say that, you going back to that, AP course, do we want to say as a system that is better than pursuing, a dual credit course or an on-ramps course that also would provide you with college credit? And so I might be a student, so I use this example a lot. My dream, it might be to be an English major. So I'm gonna need.
I think that's everyone's dream, right?
Well-
Is, you were a math teacher?
Right, I was a math teacher, that was clearly not my dream. I should have used my dream, which is to be a math student. I will
I'm one
switch.
with you.
I will
Let's go.
switch just to make my point now. So my dream was to be a math major, okay? So it was in my best interest in high school to take every AP course my campus offered. Take the AP Cal, take the AP Pre-Cal, take statistics, just load up, because it's gonna provide me with a rich instructional background and educational experience to go to college. But as a math major, I'm really gonna just need like 6 hours of English. So is it in my best interest to take AP English, where it's gonna be dependent on me passing a test, or should I consider taking dual credit, where when I go to my university, I automatically have the credit? I'm done. I meant that, because I'm gonna be my passion is math. And so I might not want to spend my time in English. Same is true though for that English major. Do they need to take AP Calculus because that's what we offer? Or should they pursue that dual credit math course that they need 3 hours of math and they're done. And they're able to get that so that they can focus on their passion for learning. And I think that's where we've got to, that's where it comes into play with kids.
So for Deanna, I mean, this system you would function just fine.
Not really, because if I'm vying to be in the top 10%, I'm not gonna take the dual credit English course. I'm that math major, but I'm still gonna feel the pressure to take an AP course in English and not maybe pursue the one I want to take.
And, you know, I think even if you were to change it where dual credit was weighted the same as AP, my gut feeling is that these high achieving kids would still take the AP classes, even because they would be concerned that the college would see that they didn't take AP English and it would somehow knock them down from something.
It could, and I think the question then becomes, do we put the barrier in place for them so they won't choose it? Or do we allow them the freedom to choose what they want, and then we start to really educate around what colleges are and aren't looking for? Because there's many, I should have looked how many AP courses that we offer. We have plenty of AP courses to show I'm taking rigorous coursework. Do I need to take all of them? Or do I have the option to take some other courses that are also college credit weighted and still pursue my dream?
I think some of the challenge for me goes beyond just some of the core courses competing against each other with dual credit and AP as well. And I think about things like cybersecurity. And I think we all can agree that cybersecurity is probably going to be a big deal for our society for the foreseeable future. And if we wanted to offer those classes and it's a real passion and interest for a kid, but a kid is playing the GPA game right now in our system, it probably wouldn't sign up for those things that are probably high demand career for the future. Their passion and interest, and yet we're perpetuating this game of collecting points. And so I think that's the part that we really have to wrestle with is, does our policy in Belton ISD actually send the message that we want it to send to our students? What is the message that we want it to send based on the policy that we have there? And for me, I do question a little bit when we rank. I've been in, you all know, multiple districts now, and I've been in a district that didn't weight GPAs, and I've been in districts that did, but I've never been in one that has 4 levels like we have. So we do it more than I've seen in other districts as well. And I do think that there are, I don't know whether you call it the cost of it or the trade-off of it, there are costs either way you want to go with a policy like this. If you want to continue ranking, we probably just need to go in with our eyes wide open and realize that we have some kids in our system right now that are playing the GPA game, and that's all they're playing in our system. And that's a choice that they're making as a family. On the flip side of that, if we change things and change a policy, then it might have implications on kids and families as well, because some families all they might want to do is get that kid into UT. That's all that matters to me. There's a book that I know you all will be surprised on this one that I read in the fall. Simon Sinek has a book called The Infinite Game. And in that book, it talks about what's really our goal. Is our goal to get a kid into Baylor University? Or is our goal to get a kid into A&M? Or is our goal to educate kids to be the best citizens we possibly can have for our society moving forward? And then I think we've got to think through some of those infinite game mindsets and decide whether or not we want to tackle a policy like this, because to your point, this is the policy that would be the most controversial to tackle.
So in that example you gave about cybersecurity, so would the suggestion be that cybersecurity would be given like a 5-point, a 5-point course?
So I think for me, I would tend to pull back on our weighting system and say, we're not gonna weight more, we might weight less. In fact, we might only weight some core level classes, and it might just be 4 or 5 or whatever number that we would decide on that count for a student's transcript. And so that students are freed up to take more courses that aren't weighted in the system. So by limiting the amount that provide weighted GPAs, you might actually be able to free some time up in a student's schedule to pursue something that they are passionate about or that they think might be a high interest career for them for the future. I think Eames ISD is one that has done something similar to that. That's Westlake High School down in Austin. And I think they've seen some positive benefits from that. I think another example that Deanna shared with y'all, Friendswood, how did Friendswood approach theirs?
So Friendswood does no longer ranks. In fact, they have a deep belief that they do not tell you what your rank is anywhere in the system. They will, if it impacts your college acceptance in any way, and that can be, proved, then they'll work with a college, but they don't rank at all. Now they still weight courses, and they're in the midst of, like if you pulled up their policy, they would say don't do what we're currently doing in terms of how they weight, because they're wanting to change that. They currently weigh AP higher than, right? I had a conversation with them. We have a conversation scheduled with Eames for next week to talk through what they're doing and how they're doing it. Again, no one's doing it the same. They're not gonna be, and so it's not about finding the answer. It's at all. I mean, that's what's the pain point, because no one's doing it the same. So when you have Texas A&M out there and UT and they're ready to accept students, it's not equitable across the state goes for and how that's being calculated to get in the top 10%.
Arturo, you had the most recent high school experience as a high school principal. From your experience, what kind of, does this play into does this impact students in what they're choosing? What did you see as a high school principal?
Every day. I've been chomping. I've been like wanting to say something because
That's why you're here.
Yeah, every day, and the social emotional impact that it has, it is burnout central, right? You think of everything that the kids do to strive for that top 10 ranking, and then how I worry about them beyond high school. Like we just work them to the bone, right? But Matt's point is what was really going through my mind is how many kids don't take engineering courses, yet they want to be engineers.
I can speak to that. Because, I've got an engineer. I'm married to one and I have one. And they believe that the math is so much more important.
Mhm.
So it's not even necessarily that the engineering class is not something, it's not even something that they necessarily want to take, is what I'm saying, if they want to be an engineer, because all they're focused on is making sure they're trained in the higher level math.
Mhm.
And so what I wonder in that scenario is, where do you open up the freedom to choose those other classes? And maybe, we certainly wouldn't want an engineering student to give up on what they're choosing in their math, but they could rethink how many AP histories they need, or how many AP,
And the other point,
yeah.
is in engineering, or whether it's engineering or just any field of study that they may be interested in. The other piece is, because when you're playing the game, you're filling your entire schedule with, all the AP classes versus just a little less AP, so you can take, something else that you're intrigued with, or that might open the door to something else. It just really, they limit their ability to kind of see other perspectives on that. And I come back to just the social emotional impact. It takes a toll.
But and I'm thinking, again, if you were to weight dual credit and AP the same, like with anything, that the concern is that one is much easier than the other. Just saying, may or may not be true, but that's the perception, and these are some of the reports I've had on some classes in regard to dual credit. So you got your dual credit kids, perhaps all scoring higher than your AP kids, getting the same weight with AP more rigor. And so then that becomes inequitable. So that's an issue, you know? And furthermore, then we have to learn how to counsel our kids again in a totally different way, because they would still need to understand that even though they're all weighted the same, your college is gonna be looking at your rigor in school, and they do prefer AP classes. Not all colleges, but certain colleges prefer AP. And so they would still have to be counseled. And that's not gonna change. We can't change that. That's a university thing.
And there's a growing trend of universities rethinking their own weighting systems around, you know, even SATs and ACT scores. I mean, that's just, it's kind of opening the floodgates now of what is it, how are universities accepting more well-rounded students and not just weighing on SAT, ACTs, or AP scores or those types of things. So this is kind of a moving target for us to also consider on that end of things, right? Where are universities heading?
So what are these kids who are right now getting 108 GPAs? What are they doing outside the classroom? Right? I mean, do we know what other involvement?
They're usually
kids
in
are
one
in?
elective. They usually have one elective.
I mean, we have kids that are in that are in athletics or pursuing a sport or pursuing a fine art.
Okay.
That, like Arturo said, you know, you take 7 classes in a day, you might have 5 or 6 AP coursework.
Right.
And then trying to be a leader in the band. I mean, these are our you know, we have leaders in these classes, and so what impact is that having on kids?
Because I go back to our belief statements, right? And I know we're not there yet,
Yep.
right? But one of the beliefs I put out there was, you know, believe that, you know, learning takes place not just in the classroom, right? It takes place in the classroom, on the field, in clubs, and
Absolutely.
the auto shop, in wherever, right? And so to some extent, I think where we land on the belief statement also is gonna shape it.
But you should not discount that they have lives outside of school. They do.
Right.
And I think it's important to try and.
Well, that's what I wanna make sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let them have that life.
Yeah, no, we want them to have that.
Absolutely, we want to encourage that, we want them to follow those.
But they can't under this system.
I mean, they can, I mean, we have kids doing that.
Yeah.
I think the question for me is at what cost?
Right.
Is it mental health? And I think maybe we should ask kids about how they're feeling and their stress levels and things like that, and get some, you know, input, so we have some data to talk about in this group. Are they able to spend family time? We talk about the importance of family and community, and are we setting up a system that actually allows kids to actually be kids and enjoy life a little bit? Or are we not? And I think some of those things we have to wrestle with, and I think, again, this is where local policy is great, because this policy should reflect the will of our board and our community and what we want for kids. But this is a loaded one, especially now, in times of heightened anxiety amongst teens, and we can pull 1,000 research studies to talk about things like that. But it's an important one for us to figure out. And I think, Chris, your comment earlier about perseverance and some of the traits of that journey of a graduate, some of those things are good questions for us to ask. Does this policy actually allow us to teach kids perseverance, or does it allow us to teach kids something else, like playing a game of being perfect? Does it allow us to actually teach adaptability, or is this policy hindering us in those ways? So I think we got a lot of work to do on this one.
Can I also say, one of the other group of people I would love to hear from is our college admissions people, and
Yeah.
from those top tier universities, I would love to hear what they would have to say on this topic. especially from UT and A&M.
I assume you would want Arizona State there as well, probably, just,
Yes.
okay. I just wanted to see.
So, we do, that's our plan, is to engage in conversations with them. I think, with every group, we wanna hear what, really unpack from them, what do they do in situations where they aren't given this information, because I will tell you, it's easier to just have a number and a rank on a kid for a college, if that's what if they're looking at that and what pushes them into another pool. Westlake, I believe, was one that said they saw, their admissions go up for some of their students when they chose not to rank, and so following that trend and unpacking. So what we wanna do
They
is,
saw, I'm sorry, admissions go up.
for their top 25%, because it pushed kids into a different criteria than just a straight ranking. So you need, and I think we have to unpack that. I don't wanna just, take one piece of data and say that's how it is for everyone. I think what, in the next slide, you mentioned, Manuel, and Chris, you did as well, just these, what you kind of started to sum up, what are the big things we're wrestling with in those questions? And I think the first one is that, how does ranking Belton ISD students impact them during their college admissions process? And that goes back to your point, Janet, what are college, and not only for the top 10%, but for outside that top 10%. Because that top 10% is gonna get in.
Right,
But what about when you're outside that?
but they may not get into the program of their choice.
They may not.
That's a big deal too.
That's right.
That's not always counseled with kids.
That's right, they may not get it right. There's multiple tier systems to get into where you want to.
Yes.
And then to really address what are those barriers that exist when students want to follow their pathway. So in choosing their hope and dream. And then, like you said, how does it weight? How does class rank and course weighting really impact our competencies? And to really have conversations around this practice with parents and students and teachers, and start to unpack it and find out what we can learn. What do we learn from our students when we sit down and, but what I know and what we all know is when we start to have those conversations, especially around this, there's a lot of emotion tied to it. And so it felt like we, needed to have that conversation really here and started to wrestle with it. And I go back to, where I said, what do we not know? We do not know. This is not going into this with where we're going to end. And I want to be real, clear about that, because we've got to hear all those voices and hear those perspectives so it can guide us with where we need to be.
So there's another part of this conversation too, that takes a look at UTech and DHS.
Absolutely.
Right, and I know that's another level down, so I don't know if we get into that here,
But I think honestly, that's addressed directly in this policy. And we wrote it in there, and it has some practices that we have to decide whether we feel comfortable about moving forward.
Right, I mean, if our goal is to, kick open doors to as many opportunities as possible, I certainly know that there's conversation around whether you choose one school over the other, you may have advantages or disadvantages.
Yes.
And I think we're gonna have to wrestle with that. What are we going to do with New Tech as a now it's a program. It was a school.
Right.
But now it's considered a program.
So I think what we'd like to do next steps is get some feedback from some people, and probably start with some of our kids to really understand how this is impacting them. If it's not a big deal, it's not a big deal. I think we all have a sense that it's a bigger deal than we even might know, so we wanna get some info, but we wanted to also engage in this conversation so you're not caught off guard when we're asking some questions and parents are asking you questions about what's going on, why are we talking about class rank right now and GPAs, and but I think some student information and feedback would be super important for us in this conversation.
I'd love to hear from some recent alumni.
That'd be great.
Arturo mentioned something earlier that got my attention when you said that, you saw it every day, you know, the emotional and the social impact. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
It was, whether it was counselors and trying to counsel students to follow their interests or play the game, it came into play, and how they counsel students were very different. They would start by what are you trying to accomplish? What's your goal, right? And really have to be very direct about that question about GPA, right? Which is really interesting because it couldn't just be about what are your passions, what's your goal. So that was difficult. But seeing the kids, and they would constantly talk about who was in the top 10 and who was 11, who was 12, who was moving in, who was moving out. New student shows up to school. Are they a top 10 kid? I mean, it was constantly on their consciousness about where they stood versus reflecting on their learning habits, their student experience. It was really stressful on that group, and it was a small group, right? It was a small group, but it was a constant kind of game, back and forth being played.
And I would say there is a personality type that
Yes,
comes with that top
very
ten.
much so.
And also a certain type of family sometimes, you know,
Yeah.
behind that. And you got kids that are more laid back,
Yep.
that take it in stride and they're just there naturally. And you got others who work till
Who had to work
midnight.
really hard.
They work till midnight
Very
every
hard.
night, you know, trying to stay there. And it's all over the map,
Mhm.
but we do want to do what's best for kids.
That's right.
Bottom line.
Bottom line.
And so, but we don't want to harm. If their hope and dream is to go to UT or is to go to a top tier university, go to Harvard, we don't want to do anything that would mess that up. You know, we want to make sure that system is still in place for those kids.
Oh, absolutely. We don't want to harm any kid in any place in this. And so,
Right.
and with Texas, we're gonna report that top 10 no matter what. That doesn't go away. I mean, that can't go away. So, now,
So
Now,
even
how we
without a
treat
ranking,
that,
right?
and if we wanna talk about the rank, and tell you where you're at in that top 10, that's local. In terms of did you make the top 10% for automatic admissions, we can report that as a, but there's a difference between that and then actually the practice of ranking. And do you need to know you were, you know, where exactly you were in it, or is it more holistic?
And I want to, as Lee said, it wasn't overwhelming for every kid, right? And so I don't want to make a broad stroke and put that on everybody, that everybody was unhappy and everybody's stressful.
No, absolutely not.
You know, there's kids that excel in that environment and have some natural gifts, and we're able to just power through and still be involved in a lot of things. And so I want to make sure that we're having a balanced approach to this because, for some kids, they thrived in that. So it's a challenge, no doubt about it. And I appreciate this group engaging in this conversation around what does that mean for Belton ISD, right? What does it mean for our community, for our district? And it is something that we need to revisit occasionally and have that temperature check about where do we stand now around our beliefs.
I think, sorry, Chris. I think,
Yeah.
to Jim's point, intent would never be to close doors for kids.
Yeah.
Intent would be to open more. And so that's where our policy, we might talk a little bit about this at our central office, but we intend to be the best school district in the state of Texas. And our policies need to be able to show that too. So I want to do it better than Friendswood or Eames or any of them.
So timing wise, right, this is clearly a super sensitive policy, right? You never make a change and then have it go into effect like that, right? So, assume for a second a change were to be made, right? Not assuming what direction we would go, right? But like, what's the time frame that you would even see change,
I
right? I
think
think,
it depends on the magnitude of it.
yeah,
And so when it comes down to significantly changing the way students are ranked or calculations, you would phase that in over a period of
Yeah.
years, right? Starting with an incoming freshman class.
so you start something with a freshman class.
That's right.
Okay.
Now, just timing for the school year is a whole different conversation. And why I said that this way is, right now, kids are starting to talk about what they're gonna take for next year. They talk about that in February.
Yeah.
And so if we're really thinking about making some changes, we have to kind of get ahead of that cycle of the year where before course catalogs are printed, before
Right.
counselors are sitting down one-on-one with the kids and families and talking about, and having that conversation that you alluded to, like, what's your goal? Is your goal a GPA, or is your goal to explore many courses, or what's your goal in all this? So there's interesting timing pieces of it. Could we make a change and have it implemented for next year right now? Yes. But I also think we've got some more work to do regarding getting feedback from the right people, doing research with the right districts and stuff, and getting in touch with those admissions counselors. So,
I heard the incoming 22 freshmen, that's what I heard.
Yeah,
No, 23 freshmen.
23,
Yeah,
yeah.
they
I was
come in
gonna say
23
22.
Yeah. I'm trying to do that math, sorry.
ideally for a major overhaul, you start with an incoming freshman class. For if you're changing like, if we were to change like a dual credit or AP, you don't take those classes until your junior year. You could introduce it earlier if we wanted to. So just gonna throw that out there, don't have to at all, not saying we would or won't, but you can do that. And I talked with the district that overhauled their whole entire class ranking system and implemented it with all students the very next year. Would not recommend we do that. But,
I'd like to stay around, so
I'm not recommending we do that, make sure, but can it be done? Yes. Is it recommended? No.
You know, those three questions that you bring up here, page 9,
Yes.
you know, me personally, I would want more data, more real-life examples, just more information, just on these three issues, right, that you point out.
I'm sorry. Well, do A&M and UT come to P20? Or like, are they part of that? I mean, this is that's kind of a great place to have a conversation like this, but no, they don't, yeah.
Well, but we do have connections with admissions counselors and representatives, and so we could, I can even think of an opportunity where we might be able to Zoom somebody in and have just some dialogue, realizing we don't want to set them up, and but we might be able to Zoom some people in and ask them some good questions as a policy committee too, or even employers, and thinking about employers about what they're looking for when they're hiring in our area. I think could be good, useful information for us to think through for this policy. So, about a year ago, I talked to y'all about when a student walks in as a kindergartner and wearing the backpack and the world is their oyster, right? They're excited about their learning, and you see it in their eyes. I want to see it in our seniors' eyes too. For me, I think that we do make adult decisions that sometimes have implications on kids that we've got to be really careful of, and this is one of them. I think every parent wants their kid to be healthy, safe, supported, feel good about themselves and their learning, and so I think about those things when I think about this policy as well. And I do want a kid to be able to go to UT if they want to go to UT. And I do want a student to be able to take engineering and go to UT if they want to do that. Or let's be real honest and say, or take auto shop instead of taking some of those other classes because it's a passion of theirs. And it might lead them to a future career in engineering in a totally different way. So I think these topics that Deanna has outlined for us and these questions, I think, will lead to some good, robust discussion. And if you all have additional things for us to research and gather information on, or thoughts for us to explore, please let us know, because I do think this is going to be a journey for a little while for us. But I do know, and Chris was one of those board members, and y'all remember we've talked about EIC for a year now. We talked about it last spring, and y'all said, hey, we probably need to look at this again. And so we're gonna look at it again and dive deep.
Probably again and again
Yeah.
for a while.
For a while.
You know, it seems to me, college is obviously the big issue here too. So, and someone used the word that, A&M in Texas perpetuate this behavior, right? So, I wanna know more about what Westlake's doing.
And I'll stick up for A&M and UT for a minute, because I don't normally do that. But I will tell you, every state that I've been in has also done it in a similar fashion. Arizona, you have automatic admissions to the University of Arizona and Arizona State University based on a percentage. Oregon, same thing. So many of these schools perpetuate these same things, and again, it's the game that's played. So.
Yeah, like Janet said, I don't wanna affect the kid's ability to get into school just because we do what we're doing. If we affect one kid, we affect too many.
And I can tell you, college traditions in Texas are a strong thing among families. So if in any way there was a perception that we would be harming people's ability to go to A&M, oh my
Right.
gosh, it would be the end of the world. So we would never, ever want, we know that, we can't do that.
There's gonna be more Westlakes in the state, you think?
There are more districts. I've got a list of districts that are starting to move down the no ranking. So yes, there are more than those. Westlake, I believe, has been doing it for longer than others. And we were looking, we've been trying to, talking around districts kind of around this area. But it started I want to say a couple of years ago. I know I started hearing about it, and it's starting to you're seeing more.
I have a feeling I know why Westlake would have made that move, right? They're high socioeconomic, lots of families would be pushing their kids towards that top 10%, probably extreme amounts of competition. They have a very different demographic makeup than we have in our district, so I can see why they would be motivated to rid them of that pressure.
A lot of it, if I remember right, was based on mental health surveys of kids. And just really diving into the pressures that kids feel. All right. Well, this is a fun one. Deanna, thank you.
All right.
Appreciate you throwing some things out there and getting us rolling. And so we'll go do some homework and come on back and keep bringing some things moving forward.
You should have just been to keep me up at night.
Hopefully in a good way.
Okay, any issues, concerns for future records? Anything?
Honestly, I would love to dive into the journey of the graduate competencies a little bit. I know that's not a policy thing necessarily, but like specifically perseverance and some of that. Like, I would love to have some conversations there.
Well, it kind of is because it's subsumed in this process, this ranking.
Well, it is, but it's not, right? I think we've got to teach perseverance in a way that doesn't impact the grade, right? And I'll use engineering as an example, right? You learn a lot from failure, right? And so does a kid get graded on the process, or does a kid get graded on, how much weight their toothpick bridge, held up, or, whatever it is, right? Like, so I don't know. So I want to make sure that we don't negatively impact student grades because of some lesson we're trying to teach them in perseverance. Like that.
It's kind of in that issue number 3 you brought up on page 9.
Well, it is, and we're starting this conversation. I've started the conversation with our department. Our clero and I were talking today about starting the conversation really with our principals and starting to go down the path and with teachers just on how are we going to build these competencies and what practices do we currently have? Kind of the same conversation we're having here about policy and where does it create barriers? Where do we have practices in our system that would negatively impact how we implement competencies?
I think, and Melinda, you've done Manuel had asked us to get together for the fall when we did a kind of a cursory look at what policies are directly affected by the journey of a graduate work, right? Does anything stick out to you when Chris brings that up about a policy that we might need to take a look at?
Well, I think is EH local, I think that's right, is that right? Yeah, EH local is probably the biggest, that and EIC are the two big policies, because EH, you're talking about how it impacts curriculum and the way we design curriculum, instructional delivery, assessment, grading, how we're assessing students, so that's probably a big one.
So maybe we do it in context still of policy, since it's the policy committee, but we could talk about competencies in now that we've narrowed down these competencies, how they might impact, like, let's start with EH maybe, looking at EH as well, and to see what might need to be discussed in more detail. But I do, diving into what adaptability means.
Yeah.
And how that plays out in policy, I think is a part of our discussion that we have to have too. And do our policies allow us to create adaptable situations?
Melinda, you said something at a meeting the other day. I don't know if it was this past maybe school board meeting, but you said when you taught biology, that in the way that you delivered the instruction, that you could talk about these, or try to deliver some instruction on these competencies, right?
Yes.
So I think, isn't that what you're talking about, Chris?
Yeah. Like, how do you learn perseverance in chemistry?
Right.
Well, hey, maybe your experiment is designed to fail a couple times before you figure out how it succeeds. Like, if you don't do the experiment exactly the right way the first time, right? I mean, there's ways to sneak that in, I would think, but.
So like, are our grading practices unintentionally prohibiting a student from wanting to fail forward, and, or are they, because of the way we grade, looking for the right answer?
Yeah.
To get them.
Are we grading the process
Right, versus
Right.
the answer.
Yeah.
versus the answer?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, and you wouldn't always want to do that, right? Because in some cases the answer really matters, right? But
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how are we gonna, I mean, in terms of a report, I mean, going back to that, what are we thinking for next time? Are you?
I think what we'll do is we'll kind of see how far we get with the EIC local from
Okay.
there. We should have policy, CW local wrapped up at that time for the facilities piece. And Melinda had laid out a few policies that we need to talk about for Journey of a Graduate anyway, and EH was on that list, but also a couple others that are just minor words. So we could bring a few of those forward. I think this EIC discussion will continue for a few meetings. I don't know if by the next meeting we'll have something to bring back to you at this point yet or not, but I do think we have some of the other policies that Melinda's already outlined that we can continue the work for the Journey of a Graduate.
You wanna do it that way, and that can address your concern? Okay, all right.
Oh yes, we also have a TASB update 116
Yes.
that I'm super excited about. That I've read cover to cover. So that we're just starting to digest right now as an administrative team, and obviously we're gonna be bringing those changes back too. So I forgot about that, that's coming.
Bring us a summary.
I put it on my calendar to look at. Let's just say I saw the email and it's on the calendar.
This must be something really long.
It's not as big as 15.
So these are, TASB does this big, like, 7-page list of all their policies that and our administrative team now has to like go through and look at the language that they're proposing and try and figure out, is this a minor change, is it a major change, what are this, it's just.
Or if they move an entire policy into a different policy, and there's pages on that.
I'm super excited about it.
Chris, anything else? Janet, do you have anything for next time? No? All right, well, with that, we stand adjourned.
All right, thank you.
All right.